I just bought this Porsche at a bank sale where it was marked with an engine issue, and because of that, it sold for basically scrap value. And I took it straight to the dealer because it's under an open recall that might fix its engine totally free. Now, I brought this car here on the trailer because in its current state, it's a ticking time bomb. Let me show you why. This loose timing chain is likely the root of our engine issues, but let's go back just a few hours when the car was first dropped off. The transporter left it in a super convenient spot right here in the middle of traffic. He obviously moved it on and off his truck, so it's no surprise that it runs and drives. Okay, all right. It's running really crummy. That's good. Look at this guy. He's doing an oil change here in the middle of the road. This thing has a really bad idle. As soon as I got the Porsche home, I plugged in my scanner so we could read its engine codes. And right off the bat, we found a crankshaft, camshaft correlation code, along with multiple misfires and a few fuel-related issues. At this point, I popped the oil cap and found this slack in our timing chain. It's pretty obvious this thing is out of time. And several years ago, Porsche issued a recall for their cam adjuster bolts, not only on the Panamera, but also for the Cayenne that has the same exact V8 engine. Basically, these bolts that hold the gear to the cam adjuster would back out or break. And this is all attached to the camshaft. When this would happen, the adjuster will spin, but the camshaft will stay put. And that'll definitely put you out of time. Now, I have the recall paper right here, and it basically tells you how to pinpoint a broken cam adjuster bolt. It starts with a set of diagnostic trouble codes, and the codes listed here are nearly a one-to-one match of what we've already generated with Carly, our diagnostic tool. Down the list, it tells you to remove the oil cap and take a look at the camshaft itself and watch it as you turn the motor over to see if this adjuster, which again is basically a big gear, spins in sync with the camshaft. So we went ahead and did this, and everything did spin in sync like it should. So I took things one step further and put a scope camera down this oil cap to take a look at these adjuster bolts, because I just couldn't believe that this recall was never done. And it turns out that the bolts that came installed in this car were definitely the factory originals. You could tell because the originals were a security Torx with a dot in the center of the head. Now, when I bought this car, I had checked the VIN and saw this open recall, but I called the dealership to verify. They said it had never been done, and this is all insane considering this recall was issued again several years ago from Porsche, and this car has 180,000 miles. 160,000 of that 180,000 were done from the first owner, and he serviced this car religiously. So how it was never done is beyond me. But the other side is that it doesn't seem like the bolts that are known to fail have failed. So it's very likely that just another part of our timing system at 180,000 miles has been worn out. But the dealership's got to mess with the timing system, and if you think about it, they've got to take those old style bolts out. When they torque the new ones back in, they're going to be putting tension on our adjusters, our cam gears, and they risk slipping those gears with a loose timing chain. So while they could probably perform this recall while being very, very careful, it's a bit risky for a dealership to take a car that's out of time, mess with the timing system, and hand it back to the customer without the very least telling me about the issues that it currently has, or just game plan it with me one way or another. Either way, we're gonna drop this thing at the dealership, and hopefully they can tell us what's wrong with it. And if we get really lucky, maybe they're even able to fix what's wrong with it and give it back to us all under the recall. Before we get it into the dealership, we should take these stickers off. This car is really shifty to run. Listen to this. We have to make it from right here to just across the street without it skipping time. Let's see if we can do it. That's probably the way we should have taken this into the dealer, but I like to live dangerously. So it's been like 3 days since we dropped this Porsche off at the dealership. I finally heard from them. They sent me a text message with a video attached to it. And the video is the tech that's working on the car in the service bay. And he's basically just recommending additional things be done to the car while it's still there at the dealer. I won't play his audio, but I'll just basically tell you what he's saying. He first starts off by saying all the tires are 6 years old, so he recommends that we get those replaced and recommends that we do the front brakes at the same time because they're worn. But anyway, he recommends we get a set of spark plugs while we're there. And then this is the most interesting part of the whole entire video. He says that your engine is vibrating heavily, so I suggest a set of replacement motor mounts. Now, in my opinion, the engine is vibrating heavily because it's continuously misfiring because it's out of time, but he doesn't mention anything about the timing system. He says it's basically ready to be picked up. And at that point, I get on the phone with the service advisor, who's the guy in the office not working on the car, and he has that list of stuff that the tech basically recommended. I had him price it out. Just wait till you hear the price on some of this stuff. It's outrageous. It sure doesn't sound like they did any additional work in the timing department. Maybe I was totally kidding myself, and I'm just surprised that nothing was mentioned. But anyway, we won't know what happened until we get the car and check it out for ourselves. All right, got my paperwork here. I'm assuming this is going to sound identical to the way we left it to him. Let's see here. Yeah, same. All right. I'm a bit surprised at the dealership here. And to be completely honest, I wasn't looking for some sort of free major service along with a new timing set and everything done at their dime. That would be totally unreasonable. I was just looking for them to pinpoint the issue, which I think you could probably do with the valve covers off. That's as far as they got during the recall. And if they were an amazing dealer, when they pinpointed that issue, they would have said, hey, you've got a major problem, but we've already started taking apart your engine to do the recalls, so we'll take that sort of time off your bill. Here's what it's going to cost you. But instead, they suggested I get new motor mounts, and wait till you hear how much they were. $4,346 for a set of engine mounts installed. And along with that, they quoted $2,587 for front pads and rotors. Honestly, brakes are super expensive at the dealership. You should never get them done there. And last was pretty insane as well. Spark plugs, $2,246. They look super simple to get to, and we'll have them out here in a moment because I think we're going to start ripping this engine apart and see if we can't figure out what's wrong with it. But this is where I urge you guys, and I've said it in a ton of videos, to get a diagnostic tool. We knew more than apparently the dealership tech did with this little tool here. Porsche charges like $300 an hour now. Call him up. I swear to you, I couldn't believe when he told me it's $300 a labor hour. This is well less than $100. And the cool thing about Carly is that it's a full system scanner for a ton of different makes and models. The cheaper tools usually will just tell you just your engine codes. This will tell you everything wrong from your engine, transmission, brakes, to all the electronics in the interior and everything. So it provides dealer level diagnostics. And they take it one step further with something called Smart Mechanic. So if you have a common issue on your specific car, they'll have a support article there ready for you. It'll tell you exactly what your problem is, and then it will give you a list of the most common fixes for that problem. So this tool was definitely designed with the DIYer in mind. And no matter your level of skill, I still find it very important to have a diagnostic reader if you own a car. So at the very least, you have the knowledge to know what's going on with your car, because it's the difference of you owning your own car or the dealership owning you. I've left a link to this tool down in the description. Now, we've got to figure out what our problem is with this Porsche. We're going to start simply by just removing the valve covers just like the dealership did. This engine doesn't look too terribly bad. Like, I see these covers here that look like they just kind of get out of the way. Yeah, that was easy. All right, the other side. Let's see. I actually stuck this motor mount here over this thing. Does this slide under? No, it doesn't slide under. So, it just will come out with one bolt, and this will probably spin upward. By the way, they wanted to sell us motor mounts. Look at that thing. That motor mount looks brand new. But otherwise, it's a matter of just kind of pulling and moving. Just disconnect everything here. Pull these ignition coils out. The valve covers don't look like they'll be too difficult to get out of place. Maybe a couple of tight screws to get to, but otherwise not bad considering it's a Porsche and they charge a fortune for any work on it at the dealer. Cool. All right. There we go. Let's see what we got. There you go. Right here. That gasket should be new, so that was good there. All right. Ooh, still a little warm from us moving it. And so the oil cover was here. Dude, what's going on? Look at this. Before, there was I could literally slap this against the valve cover. Now, it's got perfect tension. Look, this isn't moving at all. I guess the slack could be elsewhere, or is it the hydraulic tensioner is going to bleed off and we've got a worn hydraulic tensioner? I thought it was for sure the guides. Well, we still got to get this side off, and that'll help us figure.
Did he change? These?
No. Okay, good call. So if we look on the back here, these guys here, and according to the service advisor, they just take one out at a time, and I think there's 4 of them in there, and they just put another one in. That's why he said that they didn't have to mess with the timing. But you would think if they were putting torque against this, right? There's a tool that goes against the camshafts back here. You can actually see where the timing dots are, right there and right there. And it only, fits in one place. You would think if they're putting torque against this, they would want to put that timing tool on. Wouldn't you think? If they were changing the bolts?
Yeah.
So anyway, this is crazy that there's perfect tension. And so there's more to this story. Either the hydraulic tensioner's got a problem, there's slack in the chain elsewhere, which doesn't make a lot of sense.
Just turn the engine over by hand.
Well, we're going to do that. Let's get that other cover off first. All right, here we go. Let's see. What do we got? Again, we got perfect tension on this side too.
How did you check the tension before?
I literally stuck my finger on this and
Like
it would,
oil engine cap?
and it would just hit the valve cover.
So you weren't able to check this side at all?
Definitely not. All right. There we go. Perfect. Look at that. All right. I think I see something, Mike. This is unbelievable, but it's kind of exactly what we thought. And, well, I think Mike even already sees it. Mike, what do you see?
I see a piece of the plastic guide right here.
Just a piece, though. You don't see a lot of the plastic.
No,
just
it's
a piece.
actually quite loose, so you want to get a picture of it before it falls deeper into the engine.
Oh, there you go. There's some good slack in the chain. Okay, so it's really dependent on the position the chain is in and where that plastic's moving at the time. Let's see. We got the scope so you could see it a little bit better. But you see that? So that's it's pieces of the guide bunching up in there. It's all broken up. Now look, I want you to switch it from this side, switch it to this side. You could see there's like literally just one shard of it left and the rest of it's straight metal. Take a look. See, there you go. There's the bridge guide right there. And there's just a fragment of plastic hanging on for dear life in the corner here. That guide is completely gone. You can see a shard of plastic just hanging out right there. So my question is, okay, you got to figure the tech had the engine just like we have it here. Both valve covers off in order to do the recall. That's as disassembled as this engine was. Okay, something like this. Should he have spotted that?
Yep.
Again, from the naked eye here, you can see that that's straight metal. And there should be a little bit of plastic on the end. The plastic spans the entire way of that guide. It normally looks something like this. That little thin piece of plastic is basically the barrier between the timing chain and the metal bridge that it runs on. After seeing nearly 200,000 miles on this Porsche, it's gotta just be worn to bits. And even though it's probably only a millimeter or two thick, the difference is enough to cause slack in the chain, and it's gotta be why we're out of time. Driving this thing right now with that little thin plastic strip missing would be be like hopping on a public Wi-Fi without using NordVPN. At any moment, a good time could turn into a bad time. Because your online life is vulnerable to trackers and cyber criminals, but with just one tap or one click, NordVPN encrypts your data by redirecting your traffic through a remote server, making it untrackable and keeping your personal data yours. And since you can virtually change locations, you can take advantage of geographical-based pricing. And where that's really helped me out is when I'm shopping for European car parts on these projects. You know, a lot of these parts are way more plentiful overseas, which generally makes them a bit cheaper. And on some of these popular marketplace and auction sites, there are listings that are simply just hidden from searches here in the States. So when I VPN over to England, I'll unlock a ton of new listings, and I'll sometimes pay like less than half of what I would normally pay here in the States simply because I'm using NordVPN. And I've been a paid member of NordVPN over the last 5 years here. It's something I use on a daily basis. And right now, when you visit nordvpn.com/samcrack or hit the link in the description, you're going to get 4 months for free when you sign up for a 2-year plan. These plans start at like $3 a month, so it's very nominal cost to secure your online life. And you can find all this over at nordvpn.com/samcrack. Now, from what I read, the dealership actually quotes an engine-out job to the tune of like 30 labor hours in order to do a timing job on both the Panamera and the Cayenne. But I'm trying to figure out why that's the case, because if you look at the front of the motor here, this is our timing cover, and you can see where it actually splits off the car. Basically, we need to get that off in order to get to our guides, our tensioner, anything that would be a wear component in the timing system. And well, from here to even just the front of the fan, look at, there's a decent amount of room there. I'd imagine you could get a lot of tools in between all this if we just remove, you know, little things like our intake box and whatnot. And especially if we remove the radiator fan itself, we'd have a ton more room. So I'm just going to go and start pulling off all the little things around here. Let's get the radiator hoses disconnected and see if we got enough room to knock this job out literally here in the middle of a cow pasture. Now, and this car is almost 200,000 miles on the road. There are a lot of fasteners missing, which, well, is making my job so far easier. There are only 2 clips holding this fan in place. I don't have the appropriate socket to take the tension off the belt tensioner, but what we just did was remove all the bolts holding the tensioner in place, and we'll just have to get that socket when it all goes back together. But at this point, you can see the belt is nice and loose. We should be able to pop it off. There we go. So I ran out and got a clean storage container here, and it was $6. So Porsche coolant would cost us more like $30 or $40 a gallon. I think we're best off saving this since it looks so nice and reusing it when we're all done. So far, working on this engine has been like disassembling an American V8. It is truly that easy and well laid out. There's a ton of room everywhere. And heck, we almost got the entire front end stripped in order to take our timing cover off. What I want to do next is pull our spark plugs for a few reasons. Number one, well, of course, the dealership tried to sell us a new set of 8 for like, what, $2,400 So we got to make sure that they're actually the end of their life, right? But also, we want to check inside the cylinder there, make sure that our valves don't have any damage from the car running out of time. And last, well, it'll just make our lives a whole lot easier when we check the timing of the car with the plugs out. Now, again, remember, they wanted well over $2,000 to do the spark plugs in this car. There's 8 of them. You don't have to take the valve covers off in order to do that. We just obviously have them off for other reasons. And I'm going to take one plug out in real time. This one is already loose enough for me to turn with my little mini breaker here. And now I'm turning it by hand. I figure at this rate, take no more than 5-6 minutes to pull your ignition coil out, pull the spark plug out, replace it with a new spark plug, and tidy everything back up. And on top of that, well, you got to figure that each new spark plug, these are Bosch Iridium spark plugs, so they're going to be a little pricier. They might cost you, what, 10 bucks a piece? But what does that end up being? 80 bucks in spark plugs and maybe 30, 45 minutes of your time? I just don't think that's worth $2,400. All right, there's a better view of it. What the plug might have just a little bit of like soot on it, but overall, I would just clean the tips of these and run them again. Again, this is a very nice plug. These are probably maybe $10 to $12. If you bought them from Porsche, they'd be a little bit more expensive. But I can almost guarantee you these have been replaced at least once just by looking at them. You know, plugs that have been run over 100,000 miles usually are way more dark in the threads here. There is no reason to replace these. And again, in my estimation, the dealer's just doing blind estimates on stuff to get the easy jobs for the high dollars. I brought Mike back today. He brought his large shaft with him here. Mike, what is this for?
It's for holding the crank pulley in place.
You want to be more excited? You got a big shaft in your hands. Come on. Not a lot of people can say that. Here we go. I brought Mike back for the day. He's brought his big shaft. One of the important things about Mike is that he helped me time the first engine I ever timed, Ford Fiesta 1.6 liter. The water pump was leaking, and the only way to get to is behind the timing cover, behind the timing tensioner. That's Ford design. Mike, you brought your big shaft with you. How are we going to use this shaft to time? Well, it's not for timing yet, right? We're just removing more stuff.
Yeah, it just breaks the crank pulley bolt loose.
And you need that big of a tool in order to do it, apparently.
You need a lot of leverage, I guess.
Okay, and where'd you get this one from?
Amazon Rent-A-Tool.
As simple as that, we kind of just get the thing in place. Come on, there's no way. Like one hand? Is it going? Feels like it's going. Is it going?
You're like,
wow, I thought it was going to be like more dramatic than that. Wow, I can't believe how easy that was, Mike. Oh, there you go. Look at that. Here we go. We're almost ready to pull this timing cover off, but before we do, we have to drain our oil. I went and dropped the undershield here. You could see this oil pan has been leaking for quite a while. This is nasty, but it's an easy oil pan to pull off and reseal. And, you know, we found some plastic shards up there in the engine. What's not to say that a couple made their way down in the pan. We will find this out a little later. Right now, I just want to pull the drain plug, which looks like it's been stripped a bit. Hopefully that's not too big of an issue. And get the rest of the oil out. That way it doesn't slosh all over us when we pull the timing cover. But I am noticing one good thing back here, and you look at the transmission pan all back there, that all looks extremely clean. But the more we go through this car, we're finding more good than bad. All right, well, change of plans. I thought we were going to deal with this oil pan later. We're dealing with it right now because that drain plug is so incredibly stripped, and I just don't have any other sockets, no Torx. No hex keys will fit in it. I've already went and loosened every single one of these screws on the pan so we didn't have any issue there. I'm going to take them out one by one on the back end here, and hopefully we can get most of it in the drain bucket. Let's see if we can find anything in here. Oh, I'm already seeing a couple fragments. Look at this. Let's see, is that metal or is that plastic? That's plastic. I thought that this was the magnet in the corner. This is the magnet right here. Look, there's two massive pieces of it. Oh my goodness, there's gonna be so much more left in it when we pop that timing cover open, I bet. But yeah, the good news is I'm not seeing any out of the ordinary metal. I mean, maybe just a smidgen. And remember, I'm working outside here, so maybe a little bit of dirt, you know, blew in there. But otherwise, this is dirty oil and a bunch of plastic. Taking a closer look at our oil here, I am finding a little bit of glitter in it, but I'm not too worried about it yet. See, this glitter is more silver, which would tell me what's happening is the timing chain is obviously rubbing up against what's left of the timing guide, which is metal. So that's where our metal to metal is likely coming from. And when you consider that almost 9 quarts of oil came out of this, even though we had an oil leak, it's not like it was run severely low on oil to the point where we'd be doing wear to the bearings or something like that. When you have bearing material in your oil, the color is more gold, and in my experience, it looks a little bit heavier than what we see here. So yeah, getting the manifold off was actually pretty simple. Here's the cable right here that runs underneath another cap. In order to get this cap out of place, you got to take the fuel rail up. I was able to just kind of wiggle in there with a wrench and get that nut off. And now I am working on the rest of the screws on this timing cover. And these are aluminum screws, so they're really soft. A couple of them are pretty gummy. And this vice grips has saved me a couple times. Didn't save me there. 3 out of probably 24 so far have stripped very easily. So I'm trying to take it easy. I'm using no power tools, and I'm trying to go in without the extension where I can. But the good news is this is the one that took me the longest, probably about 15 minutes, which isn't bad for a strip screw. Now let's watch this, see what happens. I can hear a bunch of stuff moving around in there and just falling. Let's see here. Oh my gosh, the chain just popped a little bit. Like, oh, do you hear? Look at this. Oh, I'm just on this cable, of course. Let me see if I can move this forward a little bit. Yeah, there we go. Move this up. All right, here we go. This should move out. There it is. Out. Come on. All right, there's one. Here it comes. Oy vey, it is off. And we have a mess of plastic. Oh my goodness. I was wondering where all that slack came in the chain. I didn't realize that the tensioner is actually held in by the cover here. So that's why the chain is all flopping around at this point. And well, we'll be able to remove it super easily, but you can see all the shards of plastic that have gone everywhere. The good news is we already took that oil pan off, so anything that fell further down there we'll be able to fish out. Right now, our main goal is to just get all of the wear components off, which are the chain and the guides here, and then we just put it all back together. So far, we haven't hit any major roadblocks, and everything is just coming apart like Legos. Now, I'd have to assume that this is the original timing chain, and it looks pretty great, but the guides were a totally different story. Now, the 2 lower guides just pop right out of place, and they were in terrible shape with cracks everywhere. It's no telling how much longer these would have lasted. We're definitely catching everything here right before a catastrophic incident, and the scariest part of it all is probably this tiny spring-loaded tensioner that's for the oil pump chain. This was also cracked, and if it would have gotten any worse, it would have basically destroyed the engine beyond any reasonable repair. Yeah, no plastic left. Strange the way they put this on. It's really just clipped on either edge here. So when it breaks, it literally just comes apart in the engine. Oh, there they go. There it is. And these are just little plastic guides that fit in between the cam gears here. Oh, that one came right out. Oh, that one's broken too. So yeah, lots of old brittle plastic that just needs to be replaced. Like I said earlier, we forgot to take this tensioner out of the cover before we pulled the cover off. Shouldn't have done that. So now, I think the easiest way to get it out is just with this breaker bar and yeah. There we go. And this is one of the only decent timing components that is left. You can't even push that in, it's so firm. Which is pretty incredible when you think that it's been in there for 180,000 miles. So we probably got about a day's worth of labor invested into this Porsche at this point. And well, we've got to throw a whole entire new timing set on it. So I figure it might be a good idea to show you the overall condition of the car, because that's one of the reasons I think it's worth fixing. You know, it could be hard to justify spending time and money on something that's old and worn out. Well, there's a few little unsightly parts on this Porsche, like this smashed out rear tail light and the driver's side door panel leather here. You can see it's got a wear spot where somebody likely sat their elbow. Well, might just look like a piece of junk, but if you look at the rest of the interior and the exterior cosmetic condition, this car is actually in really good shape. Now, I said earlier that the first owner, the original owner of this Porsche, put 160,000 miles on it. The second owner had it less than 20,000 miles. And usually when you have a low amount of owners with a high amount of miles, it results in a car that's been very well taken care of. And I mean, the rest of the body in this car is pretty much immaculate. The rear seats are in really good shape. And if you look at what a used Panamera costs nowadays, I mean, even a high mileage one of these can fetch upwards of 20,000 bucks. So if we've got a day's worth of disassembly, we're definitely gonna have a day's worth of reassembly, and probably a little bit more than that, just to make sure we take our time during the timing process and do everything right. But if you consider a few days labor on this car, everything has gone by so far so good. And the fact that I found a timing kit for this car for $230 on Amazon, and seriously, that's really the only thing I bought for this car as far as parts go. I bought the timing kit for 230 bucks. I did buy the specialty timing tools to make sure we do this right. They're the originals from China, and they were open box, so those only cost me 80 bucks. And well, we're gonna have to throw some new oil in it and stuff like that, but for probably less than $500 or a little bit over of one labor hour's worth of work at the dealer, we should be able to fix this car. And get this, that cheap timing kit that we just bought included overnight shipping, so we'll have it any moment. All we got to do is grab these parts, put them back in place, and hopefully we'll have a good time. These guides going real easy. I got a little bit of oil here, and we oiled up the little stud that they sit on. We're gonna just sit them kind of in place like that. Now the tensioner will ride up against this one. That's why it's real floppy like that. So we can kind of just leave it hanging. The opposite side guide has this little spring-loaded tensioner here. And so there's a pin that's keeping it in place so we don't have to fight it. There we go. All right, you can see there's a bit of slack in our oil pump chain here. So when we take this pin, you just kind of pull it out. Now, there's tension against it. And this one just bolts right back into place. Before I throw the chain on, I'm just gonna throw a little motor oil on all the plastic here. So on its first run and when we're turning it over, it's nice and lubricated. Last, we'll put on this fresh chain and make sure it's nicely set over the sprockets and in between all of our guides. And I've heard of other people reusing their old chains because they feel like the chains have a more polished edge after being run so long, and this softer edge would bring more longevity to the new guides. And I find all this a bit hard to believe, but honestly, I didn't really see anything wrong with the old chain, and I would have been fine with reusing it in a pinch, but it made me curious. If we were to try to do this job even cheaper by just buying every failed plastic guide, would it make sense? And the answer was not really. So each guide costs around $100 by themselves. So it's way cheaper just to buy this entire kit and get all the new parts that come along with it. Now, timing this engine is a bit different than others. Since the tensioner is held in place by the cover, we actually have to close things up before we can do our most important part. We're ready to put the timing cover back on. We've done a few test runs with it, and so we've taken just a few little other hoses and things out of the way to make our lives as easy as possible. I've got my friend Irf here. This is going to be a job really meant for two people. We're going to put a little bit of RTV where the shop manual calls for it. Hopefully this thing goes back on perfectly. This is why test run was so important. We got a little smudge of RTV right there and a little one right there. But if you look everywhere else, I think we did pretty darn good considering everything in our way. So I'm going to just go and clean this off. Now we need to just get this timing cover put in place so that this bond can cure nicely. All right, now let's have a good time. To start this process, we'll loosen all the bolts on the cam gears. They're on super tight, but once they're loose, the camshafts will move independently, and we can just turn them with a wrench until we see our timing marks. Doesn't need to be perfect yet. We'll get them roughly in place with the dots facing upward. Now, in our special kit here, there's a pneumatic tool that basically acts as a temporary chain tensioner. This thing is clunky and cumbersome, and they tell you that it can be fit in through the wheel arch, which means more disassembly. But we're gonna cheat here and just use our new tensioner. Now, brand new out of the packaging, these are still pretty springy and easy to move, unlike our old one. And that's because when the engine is running, they'll fill with oil through these little passages, which gives them hydraulic pressure. I stuck the new one in a cup of oil before we installed it and pumped it in and out a few times just to get it a little firmer. And then it easily slotted in place, and I just spun it in by hand. We're not tightening it all the way yet. It just needs to be in place loose enough to put a little bit of tension on the chain. Lastly, we'll reinstall our crank pulley and spin it till the one section that has a little hole in it gets close to the 6 o'clock position. And we'll feel for that spot with this pin that comes with our toolkit. There, our crankshaft should be locked in top dead center. Now let's go back up to the camshafts, and on either side we need to fit these cam locking tools. They pop in like a puzzle piece. This is where we fine tune the position of the cams just a little bit either way. And once these tools fit uniformly, we are in time. With all the locking tools still fitted, we now need to just torque our cam gear bolts. Now we're basically ready to start this Porsche, but it would be foolish not to double check our work first. We have our locking pin in place, which means cylinder 1 should be in top dead center. Now they don't tell you to do this, but we can just verify by sticking our dowel pin here. It's in the spark plug hole and it won't go down hardly at all, which is a very good sign. And then we've got our locking tools on either side, and you can see they're sitting flush with the head. That's the biggest thing that you need to check for when you're doing this. If they're off on a little bit of an angle, your timing can still be off, but these are sitting exactly where they should be here, and again, here. I've went and tightened all of our cam gear and adjuster bolts here, so again, nothing should move at this point, and our tensioner is just hand tight. Remember, I'm going to go through and retorque everything, but right now what we want to do is spin this engine back over by hand and make sure that it's all in time. All right, here we go. We're going to take each locking tool out. We've got the pin here out, and we're just going to take our 1/2-inch ratchet. We want to be able to easily control this, so here we go. Now I'm just keeping a close watch for our timing marks to show up, and I'm starting to see them now on both sides, which means we're getting close. Yep. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take our pin, we'll put it in the crank pulley. It's not all the way to where it can lock in the engine, but if I turn it a little bit, I should feel it slide in. There it is right there. And now, if we've kept a good time, these should just go on perfectly. All right, let's see. This looks pretty good, although there's a tiny gap right here. I'm not too worried about it yet because that might be taken up when we actually tighten our tensioner, but let's try the other side here. Samesies on this side. It's pretty darn perfect though. This should be good to go. Let me go ahead. Let's tighten our tensioner and do this one more time. Now we can't forget about that stripped oil pan screw. Luckily I have this set of extractors and this one fit perfectly in the hex head. A few light taps with a hammer and a twist of a wrench ripped this guy right out. Nobody has time to deal with the dealership, so I went to the auto parts store and got this generic drain plug, a new oil filter, and a fresh tube of RTV. This really has to be one of the easier Porsches to work on. The oil filter housing comes off with a socket and there's plenty of room to move about. And so for about 20 bucks in supplies, we have a resealed oil pan with a fresh oil filter and a functional drain plug. All right, this should be the last step before we're able to test fire this. Just gonna fill it up with oil. It takes about 9 quarts. Now, not everything is back. I don't even have the belt drive back on, so none of the accessories are gonna be running. But basically, we wanna just be able to run this long enough to make sure, well, it runs way better than it did before. We're gonna clear our codes. We're gonna have a couple new ones pop up because again, the alternator's not running, the water pump's not running. But if we did this right, our engine should run way smoother and our correlation codes should go completely away, as well as our misfire codes. All right, we're ready. We've got our tensioner torque. We've got all the cam adjusters torqued. I tightened down our crank pulley here. Everything else is kind of loose in case we made a mistake. I need to get back in here. It's been a long time since I've messed with engine timing. Let's hope we have a good time and we time this one right. All right. Let's hope that The engine sounds better than the way that door does. Key in. Radio off. Now before this thing had a really long crank, idled and ran really rough. And really all of those problems should be fixed if we are back in time. Let's see. Foot on the brake. 3, 2, 1. Okay. The crank sounds good, but, well, it didn't start. Let's see here. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. Not good. Wondering if there's anything in the fueling area I forgot to reconnect. At this point, it was early evening. We had worked all day timing this engine and making sure everything was set to put it back together. So it was really annoying to have this crank no start after doing all that work. But it is much better than hearing a single crank and nothing more. So at the very least, we know the motor isn't locked up. Now we obviously drove this car to the spot where we started working on it, so the first thing we can guess is that I forgot a connection when we were reassembling everything. Off the jump, I just figured our problem was fuel related because this thing isn't even attempting to start. It's got a solid crank, but there is zero gas smell. So to start with the path of least resistance, I plugged Carly back in and did a code clear. Then I cranked the car again and rescanned. If we left something unplugged, it should leave a hard code pointing us to the exact problem. The great news is that on this scan, all our correlation codes went away, and we did generate a new code, but not for any broken connections. This is a pretty generic code that basically says the car doesn't have enough fuel to start. Now, there's a handful of reasons why we could have this code, so again, we got to start with the easiest. I did a quick visual inspection. I even loosened up the intake manifold again, as that's where a lot of the fuel connections are, and there was nothing wrong. Next, I popped open the fuse box and found the fuel pump fuse, and it was just fine. Now, there's really only one simple thing left to do, and that's make sure that there's actually gas in the tank. Now, if you go look at the dash, it does have a low fuel warning, but it clearly says there's 11 miles till empty. Now, the car is old, and maybe the fuel sender is a bit wonky, and if we are too low on gas, this would definitely create a condition where there's not enough fuel for startup, so I added a quick gallon and tried again. Oh, there we go. Look at that. Just gas. It was just out of gas. Come on. That's all it was. Could you imagine how silly we are? Just out of gas. It already feels much smoother. Look at that. It's just out of gas. Listen to that. Listen to how smooth that is. Listen to that. Think we're having a good time yet? I think we're having a good time. Listen to how smooth that is. Look at that. Not vibrating at all. Wow. Amazing. Now let's check. There's still a bunch of things unplugged, like the fan control and whatnot. So we might have a check engine. Let's see. We have a check engine on the dash. We don't even have a check engine on the dash. Look at the RPM gauge. About as still as it gets. Yes, we know our alternator's not hooked up, but we did it. And we were just out of gas. How ridiculous. I knew it was something easy. So this thing runs, and it seems to run like amazing. Well, at least for right now. And I've always wanted a Panamera with the V8 engine, but they've been pretty pricey because, well, they've just got that Porsche badge on them. Now I've got one for well under $6,000, at least for right now. We're gonna do a deep dive in this car and find everything else that might be wrong with it in the next video. So make sure you subscribe to the channel by hitting that button below. But right now, we gotta find out one last thing about this car, and that is whether it truly has failed motor mounts. Because, well, if a dealership is gonna quote me $4,500 or $4,400 for a job, and take almost $5,000 from me to do something, of course. Well, I'm just hoping that they put in the time to actually diagnose something appropriately and sell me something that I actually kind of need. Obviously, I'm skeptical, mainly because they recommended spark plugs when, in my opinion, it totally did not need spark plugs, but also because, well, we know our top mount is in good shape because we can see the bushing. The ones that you can't see, well, they're underneath the engine, they're mounting the engine to the frame, and those are the ones that do the brunt of the work. This one on the top, which isn't even hooked up right now, okay, doesn't do nearly as much. So if those are failed on the bottom, especially with our top one disconnected, when we put this car in drive, mash the brake pedal and give it a little gas, and this works on basically every single gasoline powered car, this engine will leap out of the engine bay if the motor mount has failed. Here's a good example of a car with a bad motor mount. So we're looking for something like that. Now, there will always be a little bit of movement in your motor because, well, that's what the motor mount does. It just dampens the vibrations of your engine. If you had solid motor mounts, like some race cars, your engine will actually vibrate the heck out of the cabin. So these are made out of like a soft rubber bushing, and they're meant to have a little bit of give. So it's okay to see a little bit of movement, not a lot. All we're going to do now is crank this thing over, put it in drive, and just give it a little gas. Well, at least we know that those mounts are in good shape. Now, this pretty time-consuming repair has led to one of the lengthiest videos I've ever made, but I quite like working on this old Porsche. If you enjoyed watching it, let me know by hitting that like button. Also, if you're not already following me on Instagram, where I post new projects there before they go live here, well, you can find me here. Just hit that link down in the description. Guys, I can't thank each and every one of you enough for watching today. I'll catch you very soon.